this is how my journey has all been. With little synchronicities, they all started to connect. And this is how I guess I have to learn this.
Yeah, in a spatial and holographic way, which is actually to me the most authentic through your direct experience, your immersion in that vibration and the unfolding of that. So that is the most authentic way. And that's exactly how I transmit, learn, receive, decode, write. So all the books that I have written I've all experienced them and seen them as holograms before I write them. So
Wow.
I actually see and experience a hologram, and then I immediately start transcribing or downloading or that information, that wisdom, that knowledge, that beingness, that frequency.
Yeah.
And so that's how I write. And so some books I could write really quickly, and some books take a long time. So my most recent book, Shiva's Hologram, that took me 20 years. I experienced a hologram 20 years ago, and I only finished it last year. Whereas other books like The Christ Blueprint, for example, which is very much about the Gnostic stream of consciousness and in southern France and Mary Magdalene and the
Really?
apostles, what they taught and what they lived. Yes, that was my first book,
Wait a
actually.
minute. What? Wow.
So that was my first book. And so, yeah, that was a hologram that finished writing. I finished writing that within 3 months.
I
So,
have to get that book.
and that was a really powerful meeting, communion between myself and Mary Magdalene and a few other of the Christed masters as well. And what I discovered and just not discovered but actually lived is that there's such a striking parallel between the Western Gnostic and the Eastern teachings. They actually complete each other, is my experience. So for example, like this year, what I'm teaching in workshops and online courses is Shiva and Christ. So I'm teaching in Aramaic and in Sanskrit. So I'm teaching the Aramaic 7 I am mantras of Yeshua, Christ Yeshua, which are very powerful vibrational alignments into the divine blueprint, I would say, the divine matrix that Yeshua came here to anchor and transmit and deliver to people, to support people. And then Shiva's hologram, which is Shiva's divine blueprint of sound. And so I'm actually teaching, sometimes I'm teaching one day and then I'm teaching one the other day. So I'm just going back and forth. And to me, it's like totally seamless. Like, yes, there are different languages, there's Sanskrit and then there's Aramaic, but they're like two keys into the same
Yeah.
puzzle.
It's
And
so,
actually, through doing one, I understand the other one better. And then doing the other one, I understand the other one. So to me, it completes itself. Whereas if I was just doing one of them, if I
right.
was just doing the sounds of Shiva and in Sanskrit, yes, it's all there. But because I am also teaching and the I am mantras in Aramaic, that informs and actually elevates my understanding of the sounds of Shiva and vice versa. So I find that really interesting. And it's something that I've always known is that there is an original teaching or an original consciousness, or what you call an original dharma, original religion or original source or original teaching, that is a combination of like the ancient Egyptian, Gnostic,
Yeah.
and then Eastern Vedic Indian. And
Right.
actually, they are both parts of it, but you have to go even further back in time and history to find the original source of both of them, which was a whole
Mhm.
and complete teaching. So for me, in my direct experience, and I definitely know that with all my students as well who are learning both the Shiva and the Christ, the Aramaic, is that they're experiencing that as well. They're experiencing this kind of seamless journey into the source of both of those sacred traditions and both of those lineages, which birthed both of them. So they're both like two halves of the same coin. And you can't, if I was just approaching it from the Western perspective or just a Gnostic perspective or just a Christic perspective, I wouldn't get it. I wouldn't get it all. And the
True.
same with the Sanskrit, with the Vedic Shaivite. Shiva lineage tradition, if I was just approaching it from that perspective, I wouldn't get it all. I wouldn't understand it all. I wouldn't be able to embody it all, and I wouldn't be able to teach it fully. So that's why I found in my direct experience, which to me totally makes sense and is totally organic and natural.
Raja Shrima, who's become my friend, and she definitely is a teacher. She created Kali Ki Reiki. I had her on last spring, and we just immediately connected because she wanted to learn more about the Gnostic Sophia, and she wanted to teach me more about Kali. And so all of this, meshed together for me for the divine feminine anyways, which was a very foreign thing for my Catholic upbringing brain to wrap my head around. Of course, from the beginning to the end of the Bible, women are making stupid mistakes and doing ungodly things according to man. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of things you have to shed, a lot of things I had to grieve. A lot of things I had to rewire in my brain. I had to create that space and for understanding. I went into a very quiet place by myself through all this because I felt I couldn't trust anything I read online or books I was reading. And I was lucky and fortunate to speak to some of the great ones like J.J. Hurtak, who translated Pistis Sophia, him and his wife, and and different people, beautiful people that helped me along my journey. But I almost had to shut it all out to truly make sense of what I was experiencing for myself because I wanted it to be authentic. I
exactly.
wanted to experience it for myself to where I could say, this is my truth, mine.
Yes, exactly. And that's why it's really important to have very little media input. I mean,
Yeah.
for me anyway, because sure, what I've understood is that whatever everyone's saying is true. Like everything is true for them in that moment, in that state of consciousness. Everything is true. So you cannot argue with anything. It's so silly to argue about anything. It's like, no, you're right. It's true. It's true for you in that moment. And guess what? When you shift your mode of vibration, it won't be true for you anymore. Yeah. So what's good for you in this moment will be bad for you in the next moment. And what's bad for you right now will be good for you in the next moment. And
Mhm.
this is how sound works, which is so interesting, both for Eastern and Western traditions, is that there's the hologram of life, the hologram of the universe, a hologram of reality is seen as operating in four modes of sound. So when you move from one mode of vibration sound to the next, there's a whole new set of rules. There's a whole new wavelength. There's a whole new sphere of sound and vibration and understanding and perception that
Yes.
you're in. So, what made sense and what was really true for you in the previous mode is now no longer true because you're in a different mode. You're in a different vibratory sphere. In a fourth mode, which is para. Para means a supreme or the beyond or the total. It's a silence from where all sound comes from. So the purpose of us using sound as humans through mantras and prayers and so forth is to go into the silence
Mm-hmm.
that sound comes from. So
Yeah.
that's our journey. If we're using sound as an alchemical tool, that's really the ultimate purpose of sound is silence. And then if we look at it the other way round, so from silence, then we shift our vibration to be able to make sound in a third dimension, which is a first mode of sound. Then you can see like the whole spectrum of creation. And so in both the Kabbalah and the Vedas, in the Vedic Indian tradition, they both said exactly the same thing, which I found quite, well, I wasn't surprised at all because like,
Yeah.
you know, sages in both traditions have meditated and used sound in their bodies and in mantras and in different parts of their bodies and in their light bodies and so forth. And they've all discovered the same universal principles, and they're simple. There's only four of them to do with sound, but it's the way that you use it that is the most interesting. So at the moment, humanity is only really using one mode of sound, which is a written and spoken word. So what you can hear, what you can write, what you can think words. And of course, you go into social media, newspapers, texting, whatever. That's all the first mode of sound. And that is the lowest mode of sound. People think that's all sound is, but actually it's the lowest. It's the smallest aspect or the smallest slice of the vibratory spectrum of sound. And then you go into the second mode of sound, which works more on pictures, poetry, Reiki, symbols, marrying sound and geometry together, and using pictures and using certain forms of art, sacred art, to be able to go into an expanded state where reason and logic no longer really exists, and you're floating in this kind of dream-like ocean of
Definitely.
consciousness.
And then the
So
kids say, Mom, what are we having for dinner?
yeah, exactly. So you got to move between both fluidly and master both of them, and so that's a trick. But there's ways to do that, and many of the sacred traditions in the Tibetan and the Indian and in the Western tradition as well have known this and have really utilized it. Using sacred geometry a lot, using sound a lot, and those modalities are becoming very popular again in the
Yeah.
world.
And I always wonder, is certain things a trend, right? Because some celebrity decides to do them. Or for like myself, a lot of it I've received in dreams, symbols I've received in dreams. And then I see, oh my gosh, this is a very ancient symbol. Holy cow, this is a Rosicrucian kind of symbol. Maybe it's a mixture of both.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned the Rosicrucians, because the Rosicrucians themselves say that every couple of hundred years, their wisdom and teachings come up to the forefront and then they recede back again.
Mm.
And so, but it's the same with everything. When the frequency of humanity is ripe, then
Mhm.
certain things can be shared with them. But when it's not ripe, then obviously it
Yes, you
can't be
don't
shared.
receive it. Yeah, people
Yeah.
are too
So,
busy and to receive it.
yeah.
One of the things early on I had learned, I looked at Sophia's name and I saw the beginning of my last name is in it's Vav, V-A-V, Vavra.
Yeah, right.
Vavra, R-A is the last part of my last name. So it stuck out to me, of course. My brain filtered it out. What does Vav mean? So I started on that journey of learning about the Hebrew alphabet, in Yod He Vav He, the name of God, the sounds of God. And JJ Hertok and his wife, they also have a whole CD or a few CDs where they chant the different names of God. And they said, you should be chanting your name, Vav, Ra. And I said, wow, I never thought to do such a thing, but it all brought such very profound meaning to my last name. And that my first name means the possessor of hidden wisdom. I
Shana.
said, boy, I must have done all this before I came here.
Yeah, you've created a code in your name that you can use to wake up.
Isn't that interesting, though? I would have never thought. I always hated my name.
Yeah, that's a culture, isn't it? But really, you love your name, but it's a culture that kind of twisted the perception, isn't it? I mean, the name is so important. In Sanskrit, we call it nama rupa, name and form. So name creates form. So
Wow.
any form that you can perceive in any dimension has a name to it. And any name that you can sound has a form to it, has a geometry to it. So
Wow.
they both come together, they're both indivisible. You cannot have a name, i.e., a frequency or a vibration, without a form. And you cannot have any form without there being a frequency or a name or vibration to it. So if you
Yeah.
can tune in to the frequency, the name of any object or person, and be able to tone that correctly at that person or object's resonant frequency, then you can change that person or or that object. So this happens in a third mode of sound. So I've done this as well, where if you can locate the frequency and the mantra, the name of an object or a place or a person or an environment or whatever it is, anything, because everything has a name, everything in creation has a name, therefore it has a specific frequency, therefore it has a mantra to it as well. A mantra is just a cluster of harmonics coming together, you know, to look at it scientifically, or a cluster of seed syllables coming together, like vav, tov, he, for example. That's just a cluster of seed syllables coming together. So when you know that and you can tune into that, when you get into that state of frequency, that's when you can manipulate or change certain things. So obviously the greatest thing you want to change is yourself. So if you have a name like you do, which is a sacred name, because it's in one of the sacred languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, Sanskrit, Tibetan, ancient Egyptian, so forth, are all sacred languages, then you can really transform yourself in a very direct, very simple, very easy, very graceful name, a very graceful way. And this is why so many people change their names to Sanskrit names. So you can get like Claire Smith
Yeah.
suddenly becomes Ma Kali Devi.
Rasha Shrima. Yes.
Yeah. You know, so
Wow.
they're instantly elevating their vibration. They have something to aspire to. Because obviously she's not fully embodied as Kali Devi yet, but maybe one day she will be. So she has something to aspire to and something to resonate with and something to remind herself when she's not in the, you know, greatest of spaces or state of consciousness, or she's sad or
Oh,
whatever it is.
I always wondered that. I also saw that a lot of people put Ra at the end of their name. That was interesting because I have Ra. Mine's Vav Ra.
It's also one of the names of the 8 Egyptian families. So there's 8 Egyptian
Mm,
families of netters or gods. So Ra, the appellation Ra, signifies that you are a member of that family of 8 gods. And then
holy
if you were to use, and then there's other syllables for the other 7 groups of gods. They call them god families. If you have Ra in your name, it's highly likely that you have that. Like my son, for example, his name is Shunyam Ra.
Ooh.
And he told me his name when he was in his mama's womb. He told me very clearly and very specifically that that was his name. And so that should be his name in this dimension, in a third dimension. So that's his name now. And so he knows. In fact, he was only asking me the other day, and I told him about it. I said, that's one of the Egyptian families of gods. And he has a very strong connection to Egypt anyway, from right when he was born. So, you know, he's going to step into that vibration more and more as he grows up, and be able to utilize those gifts, because each of those Egyptian families have specific gifts connected to those 8 netters or 8 gods or 8 principles of creation.
Okay.
So they all have specific gifts. So if you know what they are, then you can, you know, if you're not already, you can tap more into those gifts very easily because
Well,
it's
yeah, I
already.
need to know.